What's up, guys? Back again with another video today. This time I'm gonna give you seven tips to achieve clarity and focus in your mixes. Now, I know we've all heard muddy mixes. I know we've all heard mixes that were just muddy and not punchy, and it just makes you just like, honestly, the urge to vomit is real, fam. The urge to vomit is real. So we don't want to be cleaning up any vomit over here. So let's get these mixes nice and tight and clean and clear and punchy. Stick around, I'm gonna show you how. Let's go. All right, guys, so we are here inside the session of a song I'm working on. I don't even really know what it's called yet. It's a working title, but anyways, let's get to the tips. So first tip starts before you even start mixing the song. It starts in the production phase, actually, and it's about arrangement and sound selection specifically. You want to select sounds that complement each other, and you don't want to select too many of the same sounds that take up the same space in the frequency spectrum, right? That's how you get muddy mixes. So you want to be conscious about the sounds that you choose to put in your song. Where do they fall in the frequency spectrum, and am I causing a buildup in my song by having so many sounds in, say, the low mids or the high mids where the vocals are a lot of the time? So let me just play you a little bit of the song and so you can see how it goes real quick. So I'm choosing sounds that are taking up different parts of the frequency spectrum, right? So for example, I literally just have one bass, and it's a sub bass, and all it's doing is just it's the only thing that's down there in that frequency range. Similarly, I only have a few instruments going on. I have this electric piano, which, as you can see, is just really taking up the low mids right there, that area. And then on top of that, I have a piano. And as you can see, the piano is taking up more of the higher mids. So when you combine these two, they're playing the same part, but they occupy different frequency ranges, so they're able to coexist together in the same space, right? This is an important thing, because if you want to have a lot of things playing at the same time, doing the same thing, you need to make sure that they don't occupy the same frequency ranges, or else they're going to get muddy and they're going to compete with each other for space. You got to make sure that your sounds complement each other. And then so my main melody chord things in the song are this electric piano, this piano, and then later in the song I have another piano even coming in that's higher octave. So it's like, so I have this original piano, and then I have this higher piano. Even though they're doing the same thing, they're in different octaves, so it's okay. They're taking up different frequencies so that they can remain clear and distinguishable. So when I play all three of these, you can hear each one of them, but they also kind of mesh together into one single instrument, because the electric piano is taking up the low mids, the mid piano is taking up the mids, and this is taking up the high mids, right? So using your instruments in complementary fashion like that will really help you get clarity in your mixes, right? Tip number two is panning. So this is a way to get clarity in your mixes, because I'll let you guys know the main rule in panning is certain things just pretty much always have to be right in the center, right? So kick, your main snare or clap, the bass, and the lead vocal. Those are the only 4 things that really should be in the center, like straight down the middle. Everything else should be panned one way or another, right? So let me just show you my drums, for example. So I got these drums. I got my kick in the center, my main clap in the center. Let me just solo it. So kick and clap in the center, and bass in the center. And then the lead vocal, which I'm not gonna play right now because it's too distracting. But so for the rest of my drums, I have them either panned left or right, right? So I have this offbeat snare. I have that panned to the left. I have my hi-hat panned to the left also. My hat and open hat right here. I have these panned to the left. I have the shaker panned to the right. And I have this ride panned to the right. So remember guys, when you're panning things, there's no rule as to how far you have to pan things, right? Like these things are not panned that much. They're like 9, you know, it goes all the way up to like 50, right? Which is like fully to the right or left. But you only have to pan it slightly for it to make enough space for everything, right? And also the one thing you gotta be sure of is that you make sure your mix is balanced on both sides, right? So if you pan something to the left, make sure you also pan something else to the right, because otherwise your mix will end up sounding unbalanced if there's too much stuff on one side or the other, right? So just be aware of that when you're panning stuff. Also, you can do some pretty cool effects with panning. Like if you don't want to like just pan something to one side or another and have it stay there, you can have it move, right? So this little clap fill right here, I have this plugin called Pan Man on it, and it basically is panning it left and right. So let me play it for you. It's moving back and forth while it's playing, which is a really cool effect for claps and really anything. This plugin is really cool. You can pan stuff in motion, and it like creates a motion so that, you know, you don't have to necessarily have just like pan something over here and okay, it's done. Like movement actually like really helps a song in a lot of ways. So you can get creative with your panning. Just remember what I said about balancing. Tip number 3 is high pass and low pass filters. So high pass and low pass filters will really help you carve out the frequency spectrum, right? So the only things that I have in the low end, like under 100 hertz, is the kick and the bass drum. That's it, right? Everything else, as you can see, I have snare high pass at 100, clap high pass at 100, hi-hat high pass at 500, all the hi-hats passed at 500, shaker high passed at 500, and even the synths high passed at 100, 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 right? Because you don't need anything down there, right? You don't need anything down there for anything else really. Like that should be for the kick and bass only. That's how you get a nice punchy clean low end, and you get away from the mud and stuff like that down there, because stuff down there can add up really quickly, right? You're gonna have to make some decisions on where am I gonna want the low end to come from in this track, right? Like you got to make some decisions because it can only really come from one place, right? The low end especially is a space that can get crowded really, really quickly. So you really only want to have one thing down there, whether it's the kick, whether it's the bass. And that leads me to the next tip, high pass filtering, right? So if this song didn't really need it because there's not a lot of stuff in the high end, but the main thing that you want in the high end above like 15, 16K is like your hi-hats and shakers. So like if you have any synths or instruments that are in that range, you should high pass them a little bit to make your hi-hats and percussion cut through a little bit more, right? This song didn't really require it though, because I don't have any synths up there, right? Like the main synths are in the more in the mid-range, so it wasn't necessary. But definitely keep that in mind. And also, speaking of kick and bass relationship, this is a really important step. Subtractive and additive EQ, right? So specifically, I'm going to talk about subtractive EQ because I use that the most, additive EQ as well. But subtractive EQ I use in literally every song. So in literally every song, I do this. The kick and bass have to essentially be one instrument, right? Even though they're going to be down there by themselves, but they also can't be fighting with each other, right? They have to be the same instrument. They can't be competing with each other. So how do you make sure they're not competing? Well, first of all, you have to decide which one is more important in your track, right? Do you want the bass to carry the low end, or do you want the kick to carry the low end? Which is more important? In this track, I decided the kick was more important because it's a house track, so you need to hear that kick thumping, right? You don't want it to sound muddy. You need to hear that kick thumping. So what you're gonna do whenever you make that decision is in whatever instrument you decided is the less important track. So in this track, the kick is the king, right? So you're gonna go into your kick track and figure out which frequency is the fundamental frequency of your kick. So this big transient is hitting at about 62 hertz, right? So I'm gonna go into my bass now, and literally I'm gonna just scoop out. What I've done is I've scooped out 62 hertz out of my bass track so that it's competing less. You don't have to do a lot, right? Nothing extreme, like I just did -4 dB at 62 hertz in my bass, but just listen to the difference, right? I'll solo the kick and bass for you right now. So this is with the EQ off. If you can't hear this, you might want to listen in monitors or speakers, because you probably won't be able to hear this on a smartphone or computer speakers. So they're both competing down there, right? And look what happens when I turn this EQ on. That kick just comes through punchy and clean every time. So now they're not competing, right? And they're acting as one instrument. The kick is holding up that high end, right? And then the bass is holding up that low end. So that's how you get a lot of clarity in your mixes. Subtractive EQ, right? And also when it comes to subtractive EQ, you also want to do this for the vocal, right? So since this is a female vocal, her frequencies are going to be a little bit higher. So go to any instrument that is in like the same frequency. Like, let me just pull out an EQ really quick and show you guys what I'm talking about. So on her vocal, right? So go to the point in her vocal where she sounds most like herself and boost it, right? So right here around 2400 is where she sounds. This is like the main part of her vocal, like where the meat of her vocals are. So once you figure out what frequency range that is, you want to go to every other mid-range instrument that you have. Like for example, it could be guitars, it could be a piano, it could be a synth, it could be a riser, it could be a pad, it could be a lot of different things, but you're going to want to go through those things and actually take out that specific frequency in the synth so that your vocal has more room to shine in the track, right? So look at what I've done here. So the piano is in the mid-range, kind of competing with the vocal, right? So let me just solo the piano and the vocal real quick. So remember that frequency is about 2300. So how you can do this for yourself is solo just the synth and the vocal, right? And then boost the synth and just sweep it around. And wherever it sounds like hardest to hear the vocal, stop there, and that's the frequency you need to cut out, right? So right there, that frequency is covering up the vocal a lot. So all I'm going to do now is just cut it out. Don't want to do anything too crazy, but you can make it a somewhat narrow cut. You see, now that vocal is coming through much more clearly. Let me show you the before and after now. Without it. Now with. So I literally do this in every track, guys, and it's super important that you do this because in most cases, you want that vocal to be shining through and not competing with anything else, right? So definitely do that. Next tip is processing your effects returns, right? So anytime you have a reverb or a delay on a track, you definitely want to cut out the lows of that, right? Because that's how things can get muddy real quick, is if you have a lot of reverb on stuff and all the low end just hums and like builds up and it's just nasty. Like, let me show you. So I have this little synth going on in the drop. It's like it's a weird little, all right, so let me just play this, play the drop. And first of all, let me show you the synth without the reverb on it. I'm gonna mute the vocals actually right now. It sounds unnatural because it's completely dry, right? Like, listen to this. It's also in the same range of the vocals. So another thing you can do instead of EQing things out is you can add some reverb to make it further back, right? So I'm gonna just solo this in the vocal again. You hear how when they're both playing together, the synth like gets in the way of the vocal a bit. When you hear that, you can also slap a reverb on here, right? And it'll make the synth sound further away from the vocal so that the vocal can still be up front and won't be competing with the synth. Like I was saying with the effects, when you want to make sure is that there's not a lot of low end, right? So I have this low cut turned up. Imagine if I didn't. Listen to all this gunk that's down here in this reverb that you just don't need. Ugh. See, now that's clean. Dirty. Clean. Dirty. Clean. So make sure you do that with every reverb and delay. Cut out the lows because you don't need them. It sounds very unnatural. And also same, like, look at this crash. I have this little crash symbol with a delay on it to make it longer. So without the delay, with the delay. And I also am cutting out a lot of the lows in the delay as well, because otherwise, like I said, it'll get muddy real quick. So on all your effects, reverbs, and delays, make sure you're cutting out the lows. And sometimes the highs too. Like, a lot of times what I'll do is just an EQ where I'm only letting the mid-range through because it sounds very natural and it's really all you need from the reverb, like, and delay stuff. Obviously it depends on the song, but just be aware of that. Tip number 6 is saturation and distortion. So I know that when a lot of people, when they think of distortion, they think dirty, right? Like they think, oh, distortion will make it sound dirtier. But actually what distortion and saturation do is they add frequencies and add harmonics to a sound to make it more present in the mid-range. So if you have something that doesn't have a lot of mid-range frequencies, for example, this bass, right, that I have, it's just a sub bass. It doesn't have a lot of mid-range frequencies. So a lot of times what people run into, the problem is they have a sub bass, but people can't hear the bass at all on like a laptop speaker per se, right? Or some type of speaker that doesn't have a lot of low end. So the track will just come through with missing the bass basically, and it won't sound as good. It won't translate to these speaker systems. So what you can do is you can add some saturation. So let me just play you this bass. The bass without any saturation. It already has a decent amount of mid-range, but what you can do to beef it up is add some saturation, which I did here. So now you see those upper harmonics are really coming through. And you can do this on drums as well, right? Like I actually do this on drums in every single track. There's this free plugin called Softtube Saturation Knob, and it's by Softtube. It's a free plugin. You guys can go download it. I would highly recommend it. I always put it on my drum bus. Literally, look at the difference. This is without it. And with. It's just subtle. So I have it on a low setting right now. Let me just show you like what it's doing. And and I have it on keep low, so it's not messing with the lows like the kick drum or anything. It's really just doing like the hi-hats and stuff, which is what I normally do on drums. But you hear it, how it just makes the hi-hats and percussion up there sound a lot crisper and cleaner. So those are two different ways that you can use saturation and distortion to get some more clarity out of your drums and bass and stuff like that. Anything that you want more high-end or mid-range out of, just add a little bit of distortion and it does volumes. We've talked about a lot, but the final tip I would say is layer your samples, right? So I have a lot of sounds here, right? So I already talked about how I layered, you know, the electric piano with another piano and then another piano to make a full spectrum sound, right? And I also like to do this in my drums, right? So I have this kick drum and I have like a sub kick drum that's playing at the same time. So listen to how these two things interact. So the sub kick is just coming in on off beats and really driving that rhythm. And it's something that most people wouldn't notice in the track, but you can definitely feel it because it's down there and it's driving that rhythm. And they're obviously not gonna compete with each other since they're playing at different times, right? But they're different frequencies and they're just driving that rhythm. And I did the same thing here with the claps, right? These things are actually playing at the same time, right? So this is just one clap. And this is the other one. So this clap is more taking up the mid-range, right? And this clap is doing more high-end. And so when you combine them, they make a nice full clap sound, right? And you can see like this bottom clap is, you know, mostly around 1K, and this top clap is up here around like 4 or 5K. So like if I just took one of the claps out, you'd notice immediately if I just solo the drums right now. You see what I mean? So this is how you get really fat sounds, is just by layering stuff. And so the way you layer stuff is by frequency range, right? So I would usually layer at least 2 things. You can probably layer up to 4, right? So you do like low end, mid range, high end, and then like high end. Those are the 4 things that you could layer, right? And sometimes I just do 2, like in the case of these claps. Sometimes I do 3, sometimes I do 4. Like in this song I did the 3 layers of the E piano, and then the higher octave piano. So that's an example of a 3 layer. So this is how you can layer your synths and make use of the full frequency spectrum, right? And this will make your sounds just fatter and clearer and make them punch through the mix. So I hope you guys learned a lot. There's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of really good stuff, and I want to see some nice, clear, punchy mixes out of you guys. All right, thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. If you love this video, hit subscribe right here. I really appreciate it. Comment, like, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.